Hello guys, welcome back to Ragnar Blackmane. It's Marco here, and today we paint a space wolf in the heavy metal style. Well, let's say heavy metal look, because I just use my usual tools, materials and techniques to obtain a model similar to the GW style, but with few extra NJM twists.
This new primaris version of Ragnar Blackmane is a commission that has to fit into an existing army. So I decided to stay in canon and maintain the iconic Space Wolves look using the box art as a template, but pushing a bit more on textures and different kinds of internal contrasts, to obtain a model that gives the best in real life, delivering something visually interesting and engaging when seen up close and from the tabletop playing a game.
Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button to always know what happens on the channel. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community. I love to paint Space Wolves because even if their heraldry and armor are one of the most iconic and easy to identify in the 40k universe, it's also one of the less standardized and open to a personal touch. I have a huge collection of reference pictures, and in every single artwork the armors look different. Plus, much more than other chapters, they are linked to a specific environment, and even for total beginners they are naturally connected to ice, snow and winter theme bases, so even if only in a non-conscious level, we give more attention to environmental lights and information, and their impact on the models. For these reasons, you'll see for sure many different Space Wolves in the future here on the channel, and today I can focus on the color scheme of this chapter, and how to obtain the maximum when painting armors, fur and leather.
The main view of this model on a shelf is clearly on the side, where you can see the dynamic shape of the jump. But when playing, it will naturally face the opponent and his army, and its owner will mainly see the other side. So I want to put my main lights in the left and the right side of the figure, and make something interesting with their consequences in the middle, so every view will have something cool to deliver. This will be my main contrast of value that I'm going to support with an extra level of contrast using different temperatures. But before talking about this step, let's take a moment to analyze better what we usually call Space Wolves Grey.
There are three paints and brands that I love when it comes to paint Space Wolves, but most of the time I end up mixing my own base color, and I'm going to show you all these options.
The first one is Vallejo Sombre Grey from the game color line. I always have at least 2 pots of these at home. The second one is Liquitex Heavy Body Paints Grey. And I'll show you the third one later, because it has a huge spoiler on its label. Here on the palette you can see Vallejo Sombre Grey, and how it behaves when I spread it on the palette. It's a deep, complex tone, with a medium value, an eye covering power, and a matte, slightly satin finish. Here is Paints Grey, and you can see how dark it is because of its crazy concentration of pigments. But when I spread it on the white palette and it starts working in transparency with the background, the tone that I obtain is very similar to the first one. This color tends to be quite transparent when used in our usual thickness and dilutions, and has a proper satin finish. I use both depending on the situations. Sombre Grey is ready to use as mid-tone and mid-value, but Paints Grey is more saturated and versatile thanks to its consistency, and I can obtain a full simple transition from dark to light simply adding white.
But this is just a metaphorical fish, and you know that I prefer to teach you how to fish. Space Wolves. Yeah, makes sense more or less.
Here on the palette I have black, white, blue, violet and an extra couple of warm tones as magenta and red. What we call Space Wolves Grey is clearly a grey, it's also in the name. So you can start with a simple mix of black and white, and if you choose a cold black, you obtain something already usable, maybe for an extreme neutral highlight. But the iconic Space Wolves Grey is usually deeper and colder, and with a clear blue note inside. That's perfect for a pyjama. This mix already matches well the one you see in some old artworks and vintage models, but if you want something more complex and versatile, or simply pre-heresy, you need only to add a little pinch of violet to make it work. Violet is a basic mix of magenta and blue, so you can use also pure magenta if you want a more powerful contribute from the warm part of the tone. And maybe balance it with extra blue, basically creating violet inside the master recipe. Violet is easier to control and balance just because it's already a colder version of magenta. Same concept for the use of red, that's even warmer thanks to the yellow inside. Here are my mixes next to Sombre Grey and Payne's Grey, and you can see how well they fit with the tones out of the pot. At this point, I can reveal the third pre-made color I like. Scale 75 Artist Violet Grey. And on the label you can read the brief version of this detour into color theory. Here is how it performs next to the others.
I really wanted to show you how to create your own master recipe, not because mixing is better than using pre-made tones, but because if you know the components of a complex hue and how they interact, you can easily highlight, shade, add proper color reflections, or simply adapt the color to your needs of the moment, changing its value, temperature, and behavior, acting on the specific ingredients. And even better, you are no more limited to a specific range or type of paints.
Here I use these ideas to mix my own bluish spacewolves grey using inks. Why? Simply because I like using inks with the airbrush for my base work, and I prefer mixing my own color with the medium I like, more than adapt a perfect pre-made tone that performs worse in the airbrush. This is personal and situational, and again, with the brush I'll simply use scale 75 violet grey. But again, it's always better to have more freedom and possibilities, rather than not. Ooh, and if you're worried about matching the color for a kill team or an entire army, you need only to write down your recipe or just create your custom bottle of paint. I lightly spray the whole sketch with my mix, creating its basic modulation. I gain saturation and tones, losing a bit of the darkest values, but it's all part of the plan to catch the GW aesthetic. So, remember the two main lights from the value sketch? I add white and violet to the leftovers, to create a warmer and lighter version of the master recipe. Now you know how easy and natural it is for this mix to accept a violet note. And I use it as a warm light coming from the lower part of the left side. This is not an OSL or a reflection, simply a subtle warm contrast that will clash with the main cold tone, that I want colder to represent the main icy environmental light. For this reason, I simply use a bit of transparent white to highlight the right side, keeping its temperature as it is, increasing the value and decreasing the saturation for an icy feel. In the next stages, I'll paint a simple base coat on the other elements of the model, using mostly standard acrylics and contrast paints. The only interesting thing I do here is the base tone for the leather cape, painted with a mix of contrast Gilliman Flesh and Volupus Pink. The brown kills a bit the saturation, and I'll use the uneven, patchy finish of the mix as a base for a layered texture effect. Remember that you can mix inks and contrast paints like any other color. I use again the airbrush to paint the basic tones of the fur. I could have used the brush, and it's probably the easiest way to paint something like this and in this position. But especially working on a commission, time is an important factor, and I'm crazily fast when I use the airbrush. Plus, sometimes I just want to see if I can use it in new ways, testing an idea and getting new skills in the process. Again, the airbrush gives me speed. It doesn't make things easier. People saying that airbrushing is cheating, yeah, they are still alive, clearly don't know a thing about airbrushing. I soften the transitions and bring back saturation with transparent burnt umber. I use the same light magenta as first highlight for the cape, followed by a light skin tone to complete this powerful contrast of saturations between the folds of the cape, and give the idea of untanned leather. Before moving to the wet palette and the fine brushwork, I use black oil paint to paint all the dark panel lines of the armor. When you get the right consistency, you can see the paint filling the lines by itself. It's extremely easy to add this kind of definition even on the thin lines of the runes on the sword. This trick makes a slow and delicate work into a super quick, stress-free step. I cleaned a few little spills with a stiff, pointy brush, moistened with just a tiny bit of white spirit. I prepare on the wet palette few basic tones. Scale 75 violet grey as promised, white, black, primary colors and a couple of skin tones. Here is my progression for the lights, edge highlights, details and scratches of the armor. I consider violet grey as my neutral midtone, and I create some light and cold pools adding blue and white, and warm tones using this pastel light violet, the skin tones and magenta. Since all the elements of the model are into the same scene and the subtle contrast of temperature set by the virtual environment, every basic color will follow the same rules, getting its internal contrast. For example, for the yellow sword, I prepare a green shade for the parts influenced by the bluish light, and a warm orange shade for the details facing the enemy. Sadly, there isn't a magical secret or the perfect dilution to paint edge highlights. From the technical point of view, it's mostly a matter of patience and practice. At the end, it's just painting fine lines. And the real secret is to find the dilution and consistency that works for you. And high dilution gives you thin lines, but it's more difficult to control. And often you need to create more opacity using multiple brushstrokes on the same detail. Thicker paint stays precisely where you put it, creating strong details but more difficult to make thin and sharp. Plus, it doesn't flow easily with longer brushstrokes. In general, my paint is quite thick, but I like to use different consistencies in different areas to modulate the effect, because the various edges should take the light in different ways, depending on their position and the level of definition you need for that area. This video is mostly about armors, but I want to close with a cool technique to paint leather. And in general, every kind of material where you need a dense texture and a lot of visual noise. I use a glaze consistency for the paint and an old brush. The kind of old brush that splits in multiple points when you touch the model. I stipple increasingly lighter and colder tones following the folds of the cape, and keeping the brush perpendicular to the model. The bad state and poor coherency of the brush creates by itself realistic little dots and lines with a single motion. And the glaze dilution makes everything subtle and easy to control and layer. These sharp glaze details will fuse with the previous and the next layers, creating a ton of interesting movement and giving a precise consistency to the material, making it clearly different from the other finishes. And here is the final result. Again, to recreate a specific style, you don't really need to follow precise steps, and you can find your own way to create the look you want. I know, there is a ton of stuff on the model and the base I haven't talked about, but I really wanted to show better the work on the focal points and the iconic elements of the spacewolves, to have a solid foundation for future videos.
If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. And if you want to support the channel and my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!